Mysteries in history humanity still cannot solve. When the past falls silent. Imagine that tomorrow, archaeologists uncover a small clay tablet. At first glance, there is nothing remarkable about it. No gold, no treasure map, no portrait of a forgotten king. Just a few dozen signs. Then suddenly, those signs unlock thousands of ancient inscriptions that nobody has been able to read. In a single moment, we learn what the people of a vanished civilization called themselves, whom they worshipped, what frightened them, and why they eventually abandoned their cities. Now imagine the opposite. The tablet is never found. It remains somewhere beneath the ground, on the seabed, or perhaps it was destroyed 3,000 years ago. An entire piece of human history stays locked away. We can see walls, pottery, weapons, and graves. Sometimes we can even see faces in ancient paintings and carvings, but we cannot hear the voices. The past seems to stand behind frosted glass. The outlines are visible, while the details slip away. Tonight we are going to visit places like these. We will walk through the empty cities of the Bronze Age, cross a plateau covered with enormous stone jars, open old ship's logs, and examine books written in languages nobody understands. In some cases, one missing discovery separates us from the answer. In others, there is plenty of evidence, but every piece seems to point in a different direction. And sometimes the hardest part is that fact and legend have become hopelessly tangled over the centuries. If you enjoy quiet journeys through history, science, and the strangest mysteries of our world, subscribe to the channel. There is no need to hurry here. Make yourself comfortable, lower the volume a little, and simply follow the story. One more thing is worth remembering. A historical mystery does not have to involve a conspiracy or anything supernatural. Most of the time, the reason is much more ordinary. A document did not survive. A witness never wrote anything down. An archaeological layer was destroyed. Sometimes scholars understand the general picture quite well, but cannot recover the final detail. That may be exactly why the past feels so alive. It does not hand us a finished answer. It leaves traces and invites us to think. We will begin with the night when the cities of an entire world seem to go dark. The world that collapsed almost at once. About 3,200 years ago, the Eastern Mediterranean was anything but a remote edge of civilization. It was a complicated, living international system. Egyptian pharaohs exchanged letters with neighboring rulers. Merchant ships carried copper, tin, oil, wine, timber, and expensive cloth. Scribes and translators worked at royal courts. Dynastic marriages connected ruling families, while treaties between states were drafted with remarkable care. It all sounds surprisingly modern. Then, toward the end of the 13th and the beginning of the 12th century BCE, the system began to fall apart. Cities in Mycenaean Greece were destroyed. Ugarit, on the coast of present-day Syria, was burned. The Hittite Empire weakened and soon disappeared. Trade routes broke down. Certain writing systems went out of use. In some regions, the population declined sharply. Egypt survived, but only after fighting invasions and passing through a period of severe instability. For a long time, it was convenient to blame everything on the so-called Sea Peoples. Egyptian inscriptions describe groups of warriors arriving with families and carts. But who those people actually were, where they came from, and whether they caused the disaster or were themselves fleeing from it, remain open questions. Today, the picture looks much more complicated. A whole chain of crises may have been involved. Long droughts and failed harvests affected some regions. Earthquakes damaged cities. Internal revolts weakened governments. The trading network was so interconnected that when one important link failed, the consequences spread everywhere else. If tin stopped arriving, there was not enough material to produce bronze. If royal power collapsed, craftsmen lost their patrons and merchants lost protection. A system that had looked strong from the outside may already have contained too many weak points. One letter found at Ugarit is especially disturbing. The ruler of a city reports enemy ships and asks for help. The help apparently never came. The tablet survived because it was never sent, or never placed in the archive. The city was destroyed. To us, it is only a short text. To the person who dictated it, it may have been the final evening of the familiar world. The main question is not whether a catastrophe happened. It did. The question is what started the chain reaction. Climate change? War? Migration? Famine? A struggle for power? Perhaps there was never a single cause. Great systems rarely collapse from one blow. They often remain impressive for years, while cracks spread inside them. And still, it is a strange thought. Dozens of powerful cities, connected by letters and trade, nearly fell silent at the same time. Among the people living in that world was a civilization whose language we still cannot read. The script of the Indus Valley. If we travel east in our imagination, toward the Indus Valley, we find cities that would impress even a modern visitor. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and other settlements had straight streets, carefully designed drainage systems, brick houses, and public buildings. All of this existed more than 4,000 years ago. Yet we know almost nothing about who governed those cities. The ancient Egyptians had pharaohs whose names were carved on temples. Mesopotamian kings described their victories on clay tablets. In the Indus Valley, archaeologists have found no gigantic royal statues, no obvious palaces, and no long historical accounts. Instead, they have discovered many small seals showing animals and short rows of signs. Those signs have been troubling researchers for more than a century. The inscriptions are extremely short. A seal may contain only 4 or 5 symbols. Even the longest known sequence is nothing like a full letter or chronicle. We do not know which language the creators spoke. There is no bilingual inscription, no equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, with the same message written in a known and an unknown system. The debate begins with an even more basic question. Is it a complete writing system at all? Most researchers believe the signs transmitted information, but some argue that they may have represented families, offices, commodities, or religious ideas without recording ordinary speech. Much of the original material may simply have vanished. Longer texts could have been written on cloth, wood, palm leaves, or another organic surface. In a hot and humid climate, such records had almost no chance of surviving. What remains are mostly seals and small objects, as if our own civilization were remembered only through traffic signs, logos, and inscriptions on coins. Dozens of proposed decipherments have appeared. Some scholars see an early Dravidian language. Others have tried to connect the signs with Indo-European languages, while still others suggest a completely different linguistic tradition. But no system has yet been able to read new inscriptions consistently and produce convincing results. Around 1900 BCE, the great urban centers began to change and gradually lost their former importance. Researchers still debate why. Rivers shifted course, the climate changed, trade networks were reorganized, people moved. The evidence looks more like a long transformation than a sudden disappearance. What is most striking is the silence. Millions of bricks preserve the shapes of streets, drains, and homes. The seals preserve the signs. But not one ruler's name, not one song, and not one ordinary complaint has yet reached us in words we can understand. Perhaps the key is already lying in a museum drawer, unnoticed for what it is. Or perhaps it has not been found at all. The voice of Minoan Crete. At the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavations on Crete and revealed the remains of the palace at Knossos. Researchers discovered a vivid Bronze Age civilization, frescoes of dolphins, processions, and bull leaping, along with workshops, storerooms, staircases, and light wells. Evans called the culture Minoan, after the legendary king Minos. What the people of Crete called themselves, however, remains unknown. They left behind several writing systems. The most famous is known as Linear A. Its signs were written on clay tablets and other objects. A later system, Linear B, looked similar. Then the 20th century brought an extraordinary success. Linear B was deciphered. It turned out to record an early form of Greek. It seemed reasonable to transfer the values of the Linear B signs to Linear A. Researchers can do this to some extent. Many symbols are related, and a few words may represent place names, commodities, or numbers, but the underlying language remains unknown. Familiar sounds do not become understandable speech. It is a little like knowing how to pronounce the letters of an alphabet while looking at a text in a language you have never encountered. You can produce the sounds, but the meaning does not appear. Most surviving texts are administrative, lists of goods, offerings, and transactions. These records are useful but repetitive. A long narrative, a set of official formulas, or a bilingual inscription would offer far more clues. Beautiful theories have gathered around the Minoans. They have been linked to Atlantis, presented as a peaceful utopia, and described through highly imaginative interpretations of their frescoes. The real society was almost certainly more complicated. The Minoans traded, built, competed, faced natural disasters, and experienced political change like every other human community. The eruption of Thera, the island now known as Santorini, was one of the greatest natural events of the Bronze Age. It caused enormous damage across the region, but Minoan culture did not vanish in a single day. Later, Mycenaean influence became stronger on Crete. What happened between those stages is still being investigated. Linear A could clarify much of this. It might name gods, cities, officials, and festivals. It could tell us how Minoans understood disasters and changes in power. For now, the tablets remain silent. We look at the people depicted by Minoan artists, see their clothes and gestures, and yet their true language is still hidden behind rows of careful signs. The disk with nothing to compare it to. In the summer of 1908, during excavations at the Minoan palace of Phaistos on Crete, archaeologists found a small clay disk. On both sides, signs run in a spiral: human heads, birds, plants, tools, and other images. They were apparently stamped into soft clay with individual seals, rather than scratched one by one. The Phaistos disk looks like something that should be readable immediately. You almost want to reach out and begin. The problem is that it is nearly unique. Deciphering an unknown script depends on comparison. Researchers need to observe how signs change from one word to another, which sequences repeat, and where names, numbers, or grammatical endings might appear. One short text provides too little material. The proposed interpretations are almost endless. The disk has been called a prayer, a hymn, a calendar, a military message, a board game, and an ancient example of printing. Nearly every decipherment sounds confident, yet none has won general acceptance. There is also an uncomfortable question. Is the disk definitely ancient? Most specialists treat it as authentic, but the object's unusual nature and the lack of comparable material have occasionally raised doubts. New examples with the same signs, discovered in a secure archaeological context, could settle the matter. People sometimes ask why computers cannot simply test every language until one fits. The answer is that a short sequence can be made to fit far too many possibilities. If a person chooses a desired language in advance and freely changes the sound of each symbol, a few familiar-looking words will almost always appear. A genuine decipherment must work repeatedly. It has to explain the full system and predict how other texts should be read. There are repeated groups of symbols on the disk, suggesting that the text is structured. But researchers do not even know for certain whether it should be read from the edge toward the center or from the center outward. This object shows the difference between a secret and a puzzle. A secret suggests that somebody intentionally hid the answer. A puzzle may exist by accident, simply because almost every other example was destroyed. Perhaps the maker produced dozens of similar discs. Perhaps they were stored in another building and lost in a fire. The one surviving object is now expected to speak for an entire tradition. It lies in a museum, visible from every side. Nothing is physically concealed, yet the meaning remains out of reach. Lines that can only be seen from a distance. On the dry Nazca Plateau in Peru, the ground is covered with dark stones. Remove the upper layer and lighter earth appears beneath it. Ancient communities used this simple contrast to create hundreds of lines, geometric figures, and enormous images of animals and plants. From the ground, many are difficult to see as complete designs. From a hillside or from the air, a monkey with a curled tail appears, along with a spider, a bird, a whale, and long straight tracks stretching toward the horizon. The enormous scale encouraged fantastic explanations. The most famous connects the lines with visitors from outer space. There is no archaeological evidence for that idea. The people of the Nazca culture did not need aircraft to create large figures. Ropes, stakes, careful measurements, and patient planning were enough. Modern experiments show that the work could be done with entirely human methods. The real question is more interesting. Why did people spend so much effort on it? Some lines point toward hills, sources of water, or directions that may have mattered within a ritual landscape. Certain figures may have been connected with rain and fertility in an extremely dry environment. Processions may have moved along wider lines and open areas. Other scholars have found astronomical alignments, although the idea of one enormous calendar does not explain the whole site. The geoglyphs probably never had a single purpose. They were created at different times, by different groups, and may have taken part in different ceremonies. We often make the mistake of searching for one key to a monument that changed over many centuries. The climate helped the lines survive. Rainfall is rare and vegetation is limited, but that same fragility makes them vulnerable. A vehicle track or a careless step beyond a permitted path can remain visible for years. We know how the images were made. We know approximately when they appeared. We can see the traces of human labor. What we cannot hear are the words spoken during that labor. Imagine a night on the plateau. In the darkness, nobody can see the complete figure, only the pale strip beneath their feet. People walk along it carrying vessels, fabrics, or musical instruments. They know where the route leads and what the image means. To them, it is not a mystery or a tourist attraction. It is part of an understandable world. Today, we can see the whole design, but the meaning of the ceremony has disappeared. Sometimes distance allows us to see the shape, and at the same time, takes away its meaning. 12 sides of the Roman Empire. The Romans left an enormous number of texts. They wrote about taxes, wars, roads, medicine, agriculture, engineering, and daily life. That makes it especially strange that no clear description or image explains one unusual group of objects. These are Roman dodecahedra, small hollow bronze objects with 12 pentagonal faces. Each face contains a round opening, usually of a different size. Small knobs sit at the corners. They have been found mainly in the northwestern provinces of the empire, in areas that are now France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Britain. Their sizes vary, but many fit easily in the palm of a hand. What were they used for? The list of theories could fill an entire evening: a measuring instrument, a candle holder, a gauge for pipes, a device for knitting gloves, a gaming object, an astronomical tool, a symbol of status, a ritual object. Some modern reconstructions can indeed be used for one task or another, but proving that something can be used in a certain way is not the same as proving that the Romans used it that way. A strong hypothesis must explain the shape, the geography of the finds, the different sizes, the lack of standard measurements, and the archaeological context. If it was a precise measuring tool, why do the openings not follow a common system? If it was an ordinary household object, why did Roman writers never mention it? If it had a religious function, why is the symbolism unclear? And why are most examples found in the provinces rather than in Italy? It is tempting to choose the most attractive theory. The honest answer is less exciting. We still do not know. Perhaps dodecahedra belonged to a regional tradition that Roman authors barely noticed. The empire was not identical everywhere. Beneath Latin inscriptions, military roads, and imperial coins, local customs continued to exist. An object might have been obvious to people in Gaul or Britain and completely uninteresting to a writer in Rome. We tend to assume that a literate civilization explains itself. In reality, people rarely describe the most ordinary objects in detail. Nobody writes an instruction manual for something everybody uses each day. A Roman craftsperson might have picked up a dodecahedron and demonstrated its purpose in less than a minute. We have spent 2,000 years staring at the same 12 sides, unable to repeat that simple gesture. The legion that vanished from the records. Rome's Ninth Legion, known as Legio IX Hispana, survived difficult campaigns and left a noticeable mark on history. It took part in the conquest of Britain and served in the northern part of the island. Then, its name disappears from the surviving sources. That silence created one of the most famous Roman legends. According to the popular story, the legion marched beyond the Roman frontier into the mist of Caledonia and was completely destroyed by local tribes. The image was so powerful that it inspired novels and films. The reality is much less clear. The last secure evidence for the Ninth in Britain dates from the early 2nd century. Other evidence may suggest that it later served on the European continent. If so, the legion did not vanish suddenly in Scotland. It may have been transferred, dissolved after severe losses, or destroyed in a conflict elsewhere, perhaps on Rome's eastern frontier. Why is there no clear report? Our knowledge of the Roman army is better than our knowledge of many ancient societies, but it is still fragmentary. Lists of units changed. Inscriptions were destroyed. Official documents did not survive as one complete archive. The word vanished is misleading. The legion did not dissolve into the air. What vanished was the documentary thread that would allow us to follow its later history. Researchers compare stone inscriptions, stamps on roof tiles, military diplomas, and references to individual officers. Sometimes, one fragment changes the entire picture. So far, however, no discovery has revealed the final chapter of the Ninth with certainty. It is possible to imagine a veteran of the Legion living quietly into old age in some provincial town. To him, the unit's fate was no mystery. He knew where the soldiers had been transferred, which war they had fought, and why the name disappeared. He may even have told the story to his children. Family stories did not survive the centuries. A gap remained between a handful of inscriptions. This mystery shows how easily silence in the sources becomes a dramatic story. The absence of a document does not prove a catastrophe, yet until another document is found, mist will continue to hang over the legion's final march. The Lost Tomb of Alexander. Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BCE, before his 33rd birthday. His empire almost immediately became the object of a struggle between his generals. Even the conqueror's body became a political symbol. According to ancient accounts, the funeral procession was intercepted by Ptolemy, the future ruler of Egypt. Alexander's body was first taken to Memphis and later moved to Alexandria. Famous Romans visited the tomb. Augustus is said to have placed a golden crown upon the body. Later authors still knew where the burial place stood. Then, the trail ends. Alexandria endured earthquakes, tsunamis, fires, religious conflict, and massive rebuilding. The coastline shifted, part of the ancient city sank beneath the sea, and new structures rose above older districts. The exact location of Alexander's funerary complex is unknown. Every few years, an announcement claims that the tomb has been found in Egypt, Greece, or somewhere else. None of these proposals has received decisive confirmation. A rich structure is not enough. Researchers need inscriptions, secure dating, and a strong connection with the historical record. There is another difficulty. Even if the correct place is discovered, the remains may have been moved, damaged, or replaced in antiquity. The tomb of such a famous ruler was too politically important to remain untouched. Why does the search fascinate so many people? Perhaps because Alexander belongs to history and legend at the same time. We know a great deal about his campaigns, battles, and decisions, yet the final place where he was meant to rest has disappeared inside the city that bears his name. You can walk through modern Alexandria, listening to traffic, merchants, and the sea, without realizing that the foundations of a monument once visited by Roman emperors may lie only a few meters below. Perhaps the tomb was destroyed forever. Perhaps it remains beneath dense urban construction. Perhaps scholars have misunderstood the old descriptions. History gives us the route of Alexander's body only to a certain point. Beyond it lies an empty space. Until the city gives up its answer, one of the most famous people of the ancient world remains a man without a known grave. A place where the great Khan should not be disturbed. Genghis Khan created an empire that transformed the map of Eurasia. His armies crossed enormous distances, and his name became known far beyond the steppe. Yet the location of his grave has never been established. According to tradition, the Khan died in 1227 during a campaign. From that point onward, memory and later legend become difficult to separate. Stories say the funeral procession was concealed, witnesses were killed, and horses were driven over the grave to erase every trace. Other versions describe a diverted river or a forest planted above the burial place. None of those details can be fully confirmed. But the idea of a secret burial fits a culture in which the ruler's resting place could be sacred and deliberately closed. Researchers often focus on the region around Burkhan Khaldun in Mongolia, a mountain connected with Genghis Khan's life and honored for centuries. The challenge is not only scientific. For many people, the search itself feels like a violation of an ancestor's peace and of a sacred landscape. Modern technology can identify unusual features from satellites, study soil, and build three-dimensional models without large excavations. Technology, however, does not remove questions of ethics. Not every possible grave should be opened simply because opening it has become technically possible. There is also a practical problem. A medieval burial in the steppe may never have had a monumental structure. The landscape has changed over 8 centuries. Traces of camps, roads, and modest graves can easily be confused. Popular imagination fills the tomb with treasure. Its true historical value would be deeper than gold. It could reveal burial traditions, political symbolism, and details of the ruler's final days. Perhaps the absence of a discovered grave preserves the original intention better than any excavation could. If the location was deliberately hidden, the people of the 13th century are still winning against the satellites, archives, and archaeologists of the 21st. This leaves a quiet question. Must every mystery be solved? Or does respect for the past sometimes mean recognizing a boundary that should not be crossed, without the consent of those for whom that past remains living memory? 2 Boys in the Tower. In the summer of 1483, England entered a dynastic crisis. After the death of King Edward IV, the crown was expected to pass to his 12-year-old son, Edward. The boy was lodged in the Tower of London, which in those days was not only a prison, but also a royal residence. His younger brother Richard later joined him. The coronation never happened. The marriage of the boy's parents was declared invalid, and their uncle became King Richard III. The children were seen less and less often in the Tower courtyard. Then they disappeared completely. Their fate is unknown. The most familiar theory says that the boys were murdered because they remained a threat to the new king. Suspicion naturally falls on Richard III, yet no direct order, confession by an executioner, or contemporary investigation report has survived. Other suspects have been proposed. The Duke of Buckingham may have acted for reasons of his own. Henry Tudor, who later became Henry VII, also had an interest in removing rival claimants if they were still alive. There are even stories that one brother escaped, although convincing evidence is lacking. Years later, men appeared claiming to be the surviving prince. The most famous was Perkin Warbeck. Several European rulers supported him, but the English government called him an impostor. In the 17th century, workmen in the Tower discovered the bones of 2 children. They were identified as the princes and reburied in Westminster Abbey. Later examinations were limited by the methods of the time. Modern testing could reveal more, but the study of royal remains involves permission, ethics, and a complicated network of family relationships. The political context also matters. The image of Richard III was shaped by writers working under the victorious Tudor dynasty. That does not prove his innocence. It simply means that a perfectly convenient portrait of a villain deserves caution. There is no shortage of motives in this story. What is missing is evidence. 2 children stood at the center of an adult struggle for power. Their silence later became a tool for rulers, playwrights, historians, and polemicists. Sometimes a historical mystery looks enormous, although at its center is a very simple scene: a locked room, 2 brothers, and the last person who saw them alive. That person's name has also been lost. The man whose face was hidden. In the French prisons of Louis XIV, there was a prisoner whose identity became one of Europe's most famous mysteries. He remained under the supervision of the same prison governor as that official was transferred from one fortress to another. The inmate was forbidden to speak freely, and on certain occasions his face was covered by a mask. Later legend turned it into a mask of iron. In reality, it was probably made of black velvet. Who was the man? Documents preserve several names and spellings. One of the most frequently discussed is Eustache d'Auger. The name may have been real, false, or deliberately altered. The conditions of confinement suggest that the authorities considered the prisoner a keeper of dangerous information. At the same time, he was not always treated as a person of very high rank, and sometimes served another prisoner. Voltaire made the story especially famous by suggesting that the man was related to the royal family. Alexandre Dumas later created the unforgettable tale of Louis XIV's twin brother. The literary version became so powerful that it almost replaced the archival one. Historians have proposed many candidates: a disgraced diplomat, a participant in a financial scandal, a secret agent, or somebody who knew an embarrassing state secret. Every identification runs into problems of dates, age, or biography. The most remarkable detail is the level of secrecy. The man was not simply imprisoned. His identity seems to have been removed from the normal order of things. When he died in 1703, he was buried under a name that probably concealed the truth once again. The secret may have been entirely unromantic. Governments hide failed operations, corruption, and diplomatic bargains, not only royal births. The prisoner could have known a fact capable of embarrassing the state without being a prince. We see him through the records of his guards: clothing, meals, transfers, and security measures. We barely see the person himself. He spent years in rooms where other people decided when he could speak and who was allowed to see his face. The mask became the symbol. Although the true mystery is not the face, but the name. Until the name is established, literature will continue to fill the empty place. The colony that left one word. In 1587, a group of English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island off the coast of North America. The colony included men, women, and children. Its governor, John White, soon sailed to England for supplies, expecting to return quickly. War with Spain delayed him. Ships were needed by the English fleet, and nearly 3 years passed before he reached Roanoke again. The settlement was empty. Houses had been taken apart, the fortifications were abandoned, and the people were gone. The word Croatoan had been carved into a post. It was the name of a neighboring island and its indigenous community. White had arranged in advance that the colonists would leave a sign if they moved, adding a cross if they had departed under threat. He saw no cross. The clue seemed direct. He needed to sail to Croatoan Island. Bad weather and problems with the ship prevented a proper search. That is how the story of the lost colony began. The most reasonable explanation is that the settlers divided into groups or relocated and eventually joined local communities. They lacked food, relations with neighboring peoples were complicated, and waiting 3 years for assistance was impossible. Archaeologists have found European objects in areas connected with possible migration routes. A single object cannot prove the fate of the whole colony. It could have arrived through trade, exchange, or later contact. Colonial accounts also mention people among indigenous communities who supposedly had unusual features or knew English words. Those reports were written later and often served political goals, so they must be treated carefully. Popular culture likes to present Roanoke as a settlement that vanished overnight in an almost supernatural event. The dismantled houses suggest a planned departure. The colonists did not disappear into thin air. They made a decision and carried away what they could use. What remains unknown is where the separate groups went, how long they survived, whether nearby communities accepted them, and whether memory of their English origins remained within families. Among the settlers was the infant Virginia Dare, the first English child born in that colony. Her later life is unknown. She may have died very young, or she may have grown up in a society where the English part of her history slowly became a family story. Roanoke did not leave no trace. It left a message that was too short. One word pointed toward a destination. History simply denied John White the chance to follow it in time. The ship without a crew. In December 1872, a ship moving strangely through the Atlantic was spotted by another vessel. It was the Mary Celeste. Sailors climbed aboard and found it abandoned. The crew's belongings, the cargo, and a large supply of food remained on board. The vessel was damaged but did not appear doomed. The lifeboat was missing. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their young daughter, and 7 crew members were gone. Nobody ever saw them again. Over time, the story collected dramatic details. People described hot food still standing on the table, steaming cups, and a life interrupted in a single instant. Many of those details appeared later and are not supported by the documents. The actual evidence is quieter. The last entry in the logbook was made several days before the ship was found. There was water in the hold. Some hatches were open. The instruments may have produced inaccurate readings. The cargo was industrial alcohol, and several barrels were later found empty, probably because their porous wood allowed leakage. One plausible explanation is that the captain temporarily ordered everyone into the lifeboat. He may have feared an explosion of alcohol vapor, or believed that the ship had taken on a dangerous amount of water. The people entered the boat, perhaps still connected to the vessel by a rope. Then the wind strengthened, the rope broke, and the ship moved away, leaving a small boat in the open sea. It is only a reconstruction. We do not know exactly what the captain saw or heard. We do not know why an experienced crew decided that the lifeboat was safer than the ship. We do not know how long they survived after losing the vessel. Theories of piracy, mutiny, and insurance fraud fit the evidence poorly. No unusual natural phenomenon is necessary. At sea, one wrong decision made with incomplete information can be enough. The Mary Celeste continued to exist after the crew disappeared. It was repaired, returned to service, and was finally wrecked many years later. There is something especially sad about that. The ship the people abandoned in the hope of saving themselves outlived them. It preserved the cabins and cargo, but not the explanation. Franklin's final journey. In 1845, Sir John Franklin set out to find the Northwest Passage through the Canadian Arctic. His expedition had two well-equipped ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. There were 129 people aboard, food for several years, scientific instruments, and even small libraries. It seemed that everything had been calculated. Then the ships disappeared. Search expeditions continued for years. They found graves belonging to the first sailors who died, along with objects, fragments, and written messages. The most important note reported that the ships had become trapped in ice, Franklin had died, and the surviving men abandoned the vessels in the spring of 1848 and headed south. What happened afterward must be reconstructed from scattered traces and Inuit testimony. Hunger, cold, illness, and exhaustion destroyed the expedition. Studies of the remains suggest several possible problems, including nutritional deficiency, infection, and lead exposure. No single cause explains everything. For a long time, European searchers did not listen carefully enough to Inuit oral knowledge. Yet those accounts pointed toward the areas where the ships should be sought. Erebus was discovered in 2014 and Terror in 2016. Finding them was an enormous breakthrough, but it did not answer every question. Why were the vessels in places that differed from the expected route? Did some sailors return to them after the general abandonment? How did the survivors divide into groups? What happened during the final weeks? Underwater archaeologists recover objects from the cabins and examine the interior spaces. Cold water preserved many things. Every chest, plate, tool, or sealed container can refine the story. Even a discovered ship cannot narrate events by itself. Objects have to be connected to a sequence of decisions, and that sequence was disrupted by ice, currents, and human action. The Franklin expedition became a symbol of imperial confidence colliding with the Arctic. But the individual people should not disappear behind the symbol. Somebody kept a diary that may still be missing. Somebody was the last person to leave a ship. Somebody chose to carry a heavy object south because he still expected to return to ordinary life. The vessels have been found. The mystery has become smaller, but it has not vanished. Now it is opening slowly in dark water, one object at a time. The book nobody can read. At the beginning of the 20th century, rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich acquired an old manuscript. Today, it is known as the Voynich manuscript. Its pages are filled with smooth, confident writing in an unknown script. Beside the text are plants that are difficult to identify, circular diagrams, stars, containers, and small human figures inside strange pools and tubes. Radiocarbon testing dates the parchment to the early 15th century. The ink and materials are consistent with a medieval origin, making the simple idea of a modern forgery unlikely. But what is it? The text may record an unknown or deliberately altered language. It may use a complicated cipher. It may be an artificial notation system, a medical handbook, an alchemical work, or a book intended for a very small circle of readers. There is also the possibility of a medieval hoax, yet producing hundreds of pages of consistent writing with stable patterns would have required remarkable effort. Statistical studies show that the signs are not distributed randomly. Certain sequences repeat, while different sections have different linguistic habits. New decipherments are announced regularly. Their authors usually find a few words that seem to fit, but cannot provide a system that explains the entire manuscript without arbitrary exceptions. The lack of a starting point is the greatest obstacle. We do not know the language, author, exact place of creation, or purpose. The pictures look as if they should help, but often create more questions. A plant may be real, may combine several species, or may be symbolic. Imagine the person who wrote the book. The lines were produced quickly and with few corrections. The writer probably understood every word. Perhaps a student nearby could read it aloud. To them, the pages were not meaningless. The solution may eventually be much less dramatic than the legends. A collection of remedies in a rare dialect, written with unusual abbreviations. Even that would matter, because it would return a voice to a particular group of people. The manuscript has been digitized, and almost anyone can examine it. Thousands of specialists and amateurs have tried to find the key. A rare book has become one of the world's most accessible mysteries. Accessibility, however, is not the same as understanding. Sometimes the mystery is not hidden in a locked archive, it is lying directly in front of us. The last signs of Rapa Nui. Rapa Nui, often called Easter Island, is known not only for its enormous stone moai. A small number of wooden tablets covered with signs have also survived. The system is known as Rongo Rongo. The symbols show people, animals, plants, and geometric forms. The lines appear to have been read in an unusual way. After each line, the reader probably turned the tablet around and continued in the opposite direction. What the inscriptions actually say is unknown. By the time Europeans began documenting Rongo Rongo carefully in the 19th century, the reading tradition had almost disappeared. The island's population had endured disease, violence, slave raids, and severe social disruption. People who held specialized knowledge may have died, breaking the chain between generations. Very few genuine tablets remain, and their histories are not always well recorded. Wood was valuable on the island. Old objects could be damaged, cut up, or reused. Researchers debate whether Rongo Rongo was full writing, a mnemonic system for chants, or a combination of both. Repeating sequences have been identified. One tablet may contain a lunar calendar, but recognizing a pattern is still very different from reading a text. Another question concerns the age of the system. Did it arise independently before European contact, or did islanders create it after seeing European writing? Dating the wooden tablets is difficult because the age of the wood is not necessarily the age of the carving. Rongo Rongo shows how fragile knowledge can be. Writing seems like a way to defeat forgetting, but once the readers disappear, the signs become pictures again. Imagine an evening before the island's disasters. A specialist holds a tablet and runs a finger along the symbols, reciting ancestors' names, genealogies, or a ritual text. The listeners understand the order and rhythm. Perhaps the tablet only guides memory, while most of the knowledge lives in the voice. Generations pass, the voice disappears, the wood remains. Today, researchers compare every sign, build catalogs, and search for repetitions. What they lack is the living bearer of the tradition, the person who could simply say, "Begin here. This sign means this." Stone jars without a name. Across the Siang Quang Plateau in Laos stand thousands of enormous stone jars. Some are several meters high and weigh many tons. They are arranged in groups across hills and plains, as if prepared for a ceremony that never ended. Local legends speak of giants and a victory feast. The vessels were supposedly used for rice wine. The stories give the landscape a special atmosphere, but archaeology points in another direction. Human remains, grave goods, and traces of complex ceremonies have been found around the jars. The strongest explanation connects them with Iron Age funerary practices. Bodies may have been placed in the vessels during one stage of the ritual, with the remains later buried nearby. Many details remain unknown. Who made the jars? How was their society organized? Why were the groups placed in these locations? How were heavy stone blocks moved from quarries kilometers away? The work required planning, tools, and many people. These were not casual objects, but an important part of community life. Research has also been limited by a tragedy from the modern history of Laos. The region was heavily bombed during the 20th century, and unexploded ordnance still remains in the ground. Archaeologists and local residents can work safely only in cleared areas. An ancient mystery is literally surrounded by the remains of a modern war. New studies refine the dates and strengthen the connection with burial, but without written sources, the people who created the jars are difficult to name. We can analyze stone, measure vessels, and study bones, but we do not know which words were spoken at the funerals. Different groups may have used the plateau over a long period, and the meaning of the rituals may have changed. The same jar may not have meant exactly the same thing to every generation. Stone outlived language. It preserved the shape of the ritual, but not its explanation. When mist settles across the plateau, the jars look like silent witnesses. They do not hide the fact that they mattered. They hide why. The bronze faces of Sanxingdui. In China's Sichuan province, archaeologists found objects unlike familiar images of ancient China. Enormous bronze masks with projecting eyes, tall figures, goldwork, jade, and elaborate ritual objects buried in pits near Sanxingdui. The most famous finds date to around the 2nd millennium BCE and are linked with the ancient kingdom of Shu, a society described only vaguely in much later written sources. Why were the objects broken, burned, and placed in pits? They may have been sacrificial deposits. Ritual objects may have been destroyed during a political crisis, migration, or change of religion. Many pieces appear deliberately damaged, and the order of their placement may itself have formed part of a ceremony. Older popular accounts sometimes presented Sanxingdui as completely isolated or inexplicable. Archaeology instead reveals exchange and contact with other regions. A unique artistic style does not mean a lack of connections. It shows how diverse ancient China really was. We do not know what the inhabitants called their city, or what the enormous eyes on the bronze faces meant. Were they gods, ancestors, or mythical rulers? Why were bronze trees covered with birds created beside them? How did the ceremonies unfold? New excavations continue to reveal fragments. Specialists join broken pieces, sometimes discovering parts of one object in different layers. It is like assembling a puzzle without the picture on the box. Every restored figure answers a question about craftsmanship and creates a new question about meaning. Before their destruction, the bronzes may have stood in a temple or open ceremonial space. Firelight reflected from bronze and gold, while the giant eyes watched the participants. To the people of Shu, the arrangement probably told a familiar story. Then, the order was broken. The objects went underground, and the story disappeared. Sanxingdui does not prove the existence of visitors from space or a lost super-civilization. It proves something more important. Even a history we think we know can suddenly grow wider when the earth returns the art of a people whose voice did not survive. The city beside the great river. Near modern St. Louis, on the other side of the Mississippi, once stood the largest pre-Columbian city in North America, north of Mexico. Today, the site is called Cahokia. At its height, thousands of people lived there. They built enormous earthen platforms, laid out plazas, constructed homes, and maintained a complicated urban society. The largest earthwork, Monk's Mound, still rises above the plain. Then, the city began to decline. By the time Europeans arrived, Cahokia had long ceased to be the same great center. No written chronicle explains what happened. Archaeologists reconstruct the story from soil layers, buildings, plants, bones, and traces of fortifications. Possible causes include deforestation, pressure on resources, floods, droughts, political conflict, and social tension. Defensive works suggest periods of danger. Yet, disappearance is too sudden a word. The decline took time. People moved, joined other communities, and carried traditions with them. The word vanished is often misused when speaking about ancient peoples of the Americas. Their descendants did not dissolve. Many indigenous nations maintain cultural connections with the Mississippian world, even when the precise lines of continuity are complex. The main mystery concerns the organization of the city and why the center stopped attracting people. What kind of authority coordinated the construction of the mounds? How was food distributed? What ceremonies took place on the plazas? Did the crisis begin with the environment or with human decisions? Cahokia challenges the old idea that North America before European colonization contained only small, scattered settlements. It was an urban world with districts, political relationships, and long-distance connections. From the top of the Great Mound, the modern skyline is visible. Remove the roads and power lines in your imagination, and the wide floodplain remains. Once, thousands of hearths burned below. We know the city existed. We do not know the name its residents used. Cahokia was applied much later and came from another people. Even the name of one of the continent's greatest cities has been lost. The dance nobody could stop. In the summer of 1518, a woman stepped into a street in Strasbourg and began to dance. Later accounts say she continued for a long time. Other people joined her. The number grew, and some reportedly collapsed from exhaustion. The event became known as the Dancing Plague. Similar episodes had been reported elsewhere in Europe, but Strasbourg's became the most famous. City officials apparently decided that the victims needed to dance the illness out of their bodies. They provided spaces and hired musicians. If the records are accurate, the response only made matters worse. What made people move? Ergot poisoning was once a popular explanation. The fungus can contaminate rye and cause convulsions and hallucinations. But sustained, organized dancing by a large group fits poorly with the usual symptoms. A more convincing possibility is a psychogenic response to overwhelming stress. The early 16th century brought famine, disease, high prices, and religious fear. People lived in a culture that included stories of saints who could punish sinners with uncontrollable dancing. Expectation may have shaped the symptoms. Psychogenic does not mean imaginary or fake. The body can respond to fear and pressure with real, powerful symptoms. In a collective environment, such reactions can spread. The documents do not reveal the exact number of dancers or deaths. Later retellings made the story more dramatic. We do not know whether everyone moved in the same way, how long each episode lasted, or how many spectators joined because of the crowd. The mystery lies between history, medicine, and culture. We cannot test the blood of people who lived 5 centuries ago or interview them. We have only records written by officials and chroniclers whose ideas about illness were very different from ours. Imagine the street without music. Footsteps, heavy breathing, frightened voices. One person calls it a curse, another a disease, another a sign of the end of the world. Every interpretation increases the fear. The Strasbourg dance reminds us that human beings live not only in a physical world, but in a world of expectations. Shared belief can affect the body so strongly that centuries later we still cannot see exactly where illness ended and the story told about it began. The Copper Scroll and the treasure nobody has seen. Among the writings found in caves near the Dead Sea is one unusual document. It was written not on parchment or papyrus, but on thin sheets of copper. Corrosion made the metal so brittle that the scroll had to be cut into strips before it could be read. Inside was a list of places where gold, silver, and other valuables were supposedly hidden. The directions sound specific. Beneath steps, beside a pool, inside a certain niche, at a measured distance. To a modern reader, they are almost useless. Local place names were probably obvious to the writer. Buildings disappeared, the landscape changed, and ancient measurements can be interpreted in different ways. Were the treasures real? Some researchers think the list described valuables concealed during the war with Rome, perhaps temple property or the wealth of several communities. Others doubt that the enormous quantities are realistic and treat the text as symbolic or idealized. No discovered hoard has been convincingly linked to the Copper Scroll. That absence does not settle the question. The treasure may have been recovered in antiquity. The hiding places may have been looted by people who understood the local names. Some sites may now lie beneath construction or in inaccessible areas. The choice of copper is itself striking. It was expensive and difficult to use. The writer apparently wanted the list to survive for a long time, which suggests that the information mattered. Treasure stories usually focus on gold. For historians, the real treasure would be context. Identifying even one location could reveal who compiled the list, when, and why. The scroll feels like a map whose instructions survived after the map itself disappeared. We can read, "in the corner," "under the stone," and "beside the entrance," but the correct corner, stone, and entrance no longer exist. The writer may have expected to return after a few months. Perhaps the instructions were given to someone who never reached the place. The metal outlived both the author and the intended reader. The list exists. The treasure remains only a possibility. The sealed tomb of the first emperor. In 1974, farmers digging a well near Xi'an found fragments of clay figures. The discovery led to the excavation of the terracotta army, thousands of warriors, horses, and chariots made for the funerary complex of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. The central tomb itself has never been opened. The ancient historian Sima Qian described an underground palace filled with models, precious objects, and rivers of mercury representing the waterways of the empire. He also mentioned mechanisms intended to kill intruders. How much of that account is accurate? Measurements around the burial mound have detected unusually high levels of mercury, making the old description especially intriguing. Yet, this does not reveal the structure of the chamber or prove every detail. Why not simply open it? Because excavation cannot be reversed. Objects removed from a stable underground environment may deteriorate rapidly when exposed to air, light, and changing humidity. This happened to painted terracotta figures, whose bright colors began disappearing soon after excavation. Until conservation techniques can protect the whole complex, waiting may be wiser than satisfying curiosity. The enormous mound also demands years of preparation. Researchers cannot drill a hole and look inside without risking damage or entering dangerous areas. Modern methods allow the underground space to be studied indirectly through density, magnetism, and soil chemistry. A map is slowly emerging without opening the tomb. This is an unusual mystery. Unlike Alexander's lost grave, its approximate location is known. The secret is not lost. It is sealed. Beneath the hill may be an entire world made for a ruler who sought immortality. There may be inscriptions and works of art nobody has imagined. Sometimes the best way to preserve an answer for the future is not to reach for it too roughly. Each generation receives both the opportunity to open the tomb and the responsibility not to destroy what has waited for more than 2,000 years. Why did hunters build an enormous temple? In southeastern Turkey stands the mound of Göbekli Tepe. Beneath it, archaeologists discovered monumental stone structures with T-shaped pillars and reliefs of animals. Some were created more than 11,000 years ago. That date challenges the familiar story of civilization. The old sequence seems simple. People developed agriculture, formed permanent villages, stored surplus food, and only then built great ritual centers. Göbekli Tepe suggests a more complicated path. Communities of hunters and gatherers, or people just beginning to cultivate plants, could already organize large construction projects. What happened among the stone circles? They are often called temples, although that word may impose modern assumptions. The site could have hosted meetings, feasts, memorial rites, initiations, or activities combining religion, politics, and community life. Images of foxes, snakes, boars, birds, and other animals were clearly important, but their symbolic language has been lost. Some T-shaped pillars have arms, belts, and clothing, suggesting stylized human or supernatural figures. Another question is why structures were deliberately filled in. Earlier accounts described a single ritual burial of the site. Newer studies suggest a slower process involving building, repair, and the accumulation of material. Göbekli Tepe did not appear without a background. Other early settlements and monuments existed in the region. Its scale and age are still astonishing. Perhaps shared ceremonies helped unite large groups and encouraged more settled life. If so, Ritual did not merely follow society, it helped create it. We usually search for practical motives such as food, defense, or trade. Human beings, however, have always spent energy on shared meaning. They gathered, told stories, remembered the dead, and represented beings they considered important. The stone pillars remain. The stories once told between them do not. Göbekli Tepe asks not only, what was this place, but a deeper question. What first persuaded people to gather for a task that could not be eaten, worn, or used as a weapon? What happened to the Sea Peoples? We began with the Bronze Age collapse. Now we return to the people whose modern name became almost synonymous with that disaster. Sea Peoples was not the name of one nation. It is a modern label for several groups mentioned in Egyptian texts. Some names have been connected with later Mediterranean peoples, but the identifications remain disputed. Egyptian reliefs show sea battles, warriors in unusual headdresses, and women and children traveling in carts. This does not look like an ordinary military raid. These may have been migrating communities searching for somewhere to live. Why did they move? If drought destroyed crops and trade failed, whole groups may have left home. They could have included former mercenaries, sailors, craftspeople, and residents of ruined states. They attacked, traded, made alliances, and settled in new places. Egyptian inscriptions celebrate the pharaoh's victory, but royal texts were not neutral reports. They emphasized the ruler's strength and may have combined several events into one grand scene. Archaeologists find changes in pottery, weapons, and burial traditions. Yet a new style does not always prove mass migration. Ideas travel through trade, marriage, and small groups. Some sea peoples may have helped form new societies on the Levantine coast. Others disappeared from the records as quickly as they appeared. They may have changed names or blended into local populations. We want a homeland, and a neat arrow on a map. Real migrations are rarely one arrow. People move in stages, turn back, divide, and absorb neighbors. The name creates an image of a mysterious fleet arriving from nowhere. In reality, it reflects the Egyptian view of different people appearing at their border. If an archive belonging to one of those communities is ever found, the story will change completely. We will see not attackers on a pharaoh's wall, but people describing their own losses. For now, they exist mainly in the words of others. History preserved the victor's face and left the people from the sea without a voice. The land of Punt, where pharaohs sent their ships. On the walls of Queen Hatshepsut's temple is an unusual expedition. Ships reach the distant land of Punt. Egyptians meet local rulers and load incense, timber, gold, animal skins, and living creatures. Trees producing fragrant resin were especially valuable in temple ceremonies. Egyptian texts mention Punt for many centuries. It was a real trading partner, not a mythical country. Yet we still cannot place a definite point on a map and say, Punt was here. Possible regions lie around the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, modern Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, Sudan, or an area crossing several present-day borders. Punt may have referred to a broad trading region rather than one capital. The pictures provide clues: houses on stilts, palms, exotic animals, and local clothing. The goods also indicate climate and ecology. Researchers have even studied mummified baboons from Egypt, comparing their chemical signatures with regions of East Africa and Arabia. The evidence narrows the search but does not provide an address. Ancient Egyptians did not leave a clear map because their texts were not made for us. A scribe did not need to explain a familiar trading region to contemporaries. Sailors, officials, and intermediaries knew the route. Hatshepsut's ships may have been dismantled, carried through the desert to the Red Sea, rebuilt, and sent along the coast. Bringing living trees back in pots displayed organization as much as wealth. The temple relief presents a triumphant journey. We see arrival, exchange, and return. We do not hear a sailor describing wind, reefs, and weeks on open water. One day, a port with Egyptian objects and a local inscription may connect the two worlds. Until then, Punt remains a rare, lost land about which we know quite a lot, except exactly where it was. The City of the Gods, without a known name. Northeast of modern Mexico City lie the ruins of Teotihuacan. The broad Avenue of the Dead runs between monumental structures now called the Pyramids of the Sun and Moon. At its height, it was one of the largest cities in the world. The name Teotihuacan was given by the Aztecs centuries after the city's decline. We do not know what its own residents called it, or which language filled its streets. People of different origins lived there. Archaeologists find neighborhoods linked with cultures from other parts of Mesoamerica. It was a commercial, political, and religious center whose influence reached far beyond the valley. Who governed it? Unlike classic Maya art, Teotihuacan does not present a gallery of named kings. Power may have been collective, divided among elite groups or priestly institutions. Rulers may have been shown in impersonal ritual forms rather than as individuals. Symbols and short signs survive, but no fully readable written system gives us chronicles. The state must be reconstructed through architecture, burials, and art. In the 6th century, central buildings connected with power were burned and destroyed. This may have been an internal uprising, a conflict among elites, or part of a wider crisis. Climate pressure and shortages may have made tensions worse. Again, disappearance is too strong a word. The city continued, although its population and influence declined. People moved elsewhere, and later cultures regarded the ruins as a place of immense sacred power. A tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent contained rich offerings and may have represented the underworld. Robots and modern instruments helped explore difficult areas, yet no royal tomb provided a simple answer about government. Teotihuacan has a habit of offering magnificent discoveries while keeping its central secret. We can estimate its population, study mural pigments, and trace the trade in obsidian. We cannot name the person who looked down from the pyramid, or the word that person used for home. The stone circle that kept changing meaning. Stonehenge is familiar even to people who have never visited England. Its enormous stones form one of the most recognizable silhouettes in the ancient world. The question, who built Stonehenge, sounds mysterious. But archaeologists know a great deal about the Neolithic and Bronze Age communities involved. The monument was not built at once. The landscape was used and redesigned over many generations. The more difficult question is why. Some elements align with sunrise and sunset at the solstices. That was clearly important. Calling Stonehenge only a calendar, however, simplifies it too much. Burials have been found around the monument. Nearby were settlements and other ceremonial sites. The stones may have connected the living with the ancestors, marked seasons, and created a meeting place for people from distant regions. Evidence from human remains and materials reveals long-distance connections. Some visitors came from far away. The smaller bluestones traveled from Wales over hundreds of kilometers. The larger sarsens came from a nearer but still distant source. Ropes, sledges, timber frames, and coordinated labor could move the stones. Experiments demonstrate several methods, but the exact route and organization remain unknown. Some researchers suggest that bluestones first stood in another circle and were moved with people leaving an earlier homeland. If so, they were not just building material, but part of a community's memory. Stonehenge did not have one meaning forever. The people who dug the earliest ditches lived in a different world from those who raised the great trilithons. Later generations reinterpreted the place again. We ask about an ancient monument as if it were a modern building with one label: school, warehouse, or station. A sacred landscape can be a calendar, cemetery, meeting place, symbol of alliance, and stage for ritual at the same time. The stones preserved their direction toward the sun. They did not preserve the words of the ceremony. Where is Cleopatra buried? Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony died in 30 BCE after losing their war against Octavian. Ancient authors say the victor allowed them to be buried together. The tomb has never been found. Alexandria is the most obvious place to search. The problem is similar to the search for Alexander's tomb. The ancient city suffered destruction, rebuilding, and changes to the shoreline. Some districts are underwater. Others lie beneath modern buildings. Another well-known theory places the burial at the temple complex of Taposiris Magna, west of Alexandria. Excavations there have found coins bearing Cleopatra's portrait, burials, and tunnels. Such discoveries show that the place mattered in her era, but they do not prove that the queen was buried there. Headlines announcing "Cleopatra's tomb found" appear regularly, although decisive evidence is still missing. What would count as proof? An inscription with her name and titles? A royal complex of the proper period? Objects with secure origins? And remains that could be connected with the dynasty? One impressive sarcophagus would not be enough. The tomb may not have survived. Octavian wanted to control the memory of the defeated ruler. Later political and religious changes could have altered or destroyed the monument. Cleopatra's image was shaped for centuries by enemies, poets, painters, and filmmakers. Popular stories emphasize beauty and romance. She was also an educated ruler who spoke several languages and tried to preserve Egypt's independence while Roman power expanded. The search matters for more than a famous name. A preserved burial complex might reveal how Cleopatra herself wished to present her authority and her connection with Egyptian tradition. Perhaps she chose a place that seemed obvious to everyone at the time. Perhaps thousands once saw the mausoleum in the heart of Alexandria. Then sea, stone, and new streets erased the landmarks. Cleopatra lost the struggle for the future of her state. The mystery of her grave gave her another form of immortality. The world is still looking for the Queen's final address. Why answers disappear? After all these stories, it may feel as if the past is deliberately teasing us. It leaves enough evidence to awaken curiosity and removes exactly the detail needed for certainty. The explanation is simpler. What survives is not what mattered most. It is what was most durable. Stone outlives song. Fired clay outlives cloth. A metal object remains while its instructions disappear. A king's official inscription is carved on a wall, while an ordinary person's story is carried by voice and vanishes after a few generations. Archaeology also works with a disturbed picture. Tombs were robbed. Cities were built over older cities. Rivers changed course. Collectors removed objects from their context. Wars destroyed museums and archives. Context can matter more than the object. A Roman dodecahedron found in a recorded layer beside other items can reveal more than a beautiful example with no known origin. An unknown tablet becomes far more valuable if a translation lies beside it. Bones answer certain questions only when their position is known. Our expectations create another problem. We prefer one dramatic cause. One invader destroyed the civilization, one secret lies in the book, one criminal caused the disappearance. Real history is often made of many small decisions, accidents, and processes. Sometimes a mystery is solved not by a spectacular discovery, but by abandoning the wrong question. Instead of asking, "Where did the people vanish?" researchers ask, "How did settlements change, and where did families move?" Instead of, "Why were all these lines built?" they ask, "What different activities happened here over different centuries?" It sounds less sensational, but comes closer to reality. Hope for a great discovery remains. New methods can read burned scrolls, examine sealed spaces, isolate ancient DNA, and detect cities beneath forests. What seemed impossible yesterday may become a fact in a schoolbook tomorrow. A light in the window of the past. We have traveled through cities that lost their names, writing systems without readers, ships without crews, and tombs without known graves. Again and again, the answer depended not on a miracle, but on something very small. One document, one inscription, one securely identified place. Perhaps somebody is now brushing soil from a fragment that will connect two broken ends of a story. Perhaps an object already lies in museum storage, waiting for someone to understand its importance. And perhaps certain answers have vanished forever. Even an unsolved story gives us something valuable. It teaches us to doubt explanations that are too simple. It reminds us that silence is not evidence. It shows how fragile human memory really is. People in the past did not experience their lives as mysteries. They knew what objects were for, spoke the names of their cities, read books, and argued about events that now seem hidden in fog. They were confident that their world made sense. We probably feel the same way about our own time. Someday, a distant researcher may find one of our objects without instructions, a fragment of a message, or the foundations of a building. That person will propose several theories and argue with colleagues about what we were trying to say. History is not a closed book. It is more like an enormous dark library with lights burning in only a few windows. Tonight, we looked through some of them. Thank you for spending this time with me. If the story helped you relax, breathe more easily, or learn something new, support the video and subscribe to the channel. Now you can let go of the last thoughts, make yourself comfortable, and allow the past to dissolve slowly into silence.